Well, thank you all for coming this afternoon on a beautiful sunny day. On behalf of the Santa Clara County Leagues of Women Voters, I welcome you to today's program with Congressman Sam Liccardo. My name is Katie Zoglin, and I'm the president of the Los Altos Mountain View area chapter of the League of Women Voters. This forum is sponsored by the 5 Leagues of Women Voters in Santa Clara County. The 5 leagues in our county are Cupertino-Sunnyvale, Southwest Santa Clara Valley, Santa Clara San Jose, Palo Alto, and Los Altos Mountain View area. The League of Women Voters is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, grassroots organization open to everyone, not just to women. We do not advocate for or against political parties or candidates. At times, we do take positions on policy questions, but only after we have studied an issue and formulated a policy position based on that study. The League encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase the understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. With over 100 years of experience, the League is one of America's oldest and most trusted civic nonprofit organizations. We encourage everyone here to join the League and to participate in efforts to strengthen our democracy. I'd first like to invite Gloria Chun-Hu, who is the president of the League of Women Voters for the state of California.
Thank you, Katie. I'm delighted to be here. This is only my second appearance in my new job as president of the State League. Good reminder that as a member of the League of, whether Palo Alto, Los Altos Mountain View, what have you, and I come from San Jose, Santa Clara, where I was the past president, the League has 3 tiers. In addition to your local league, we have the State League of California, as well as the National League of the United States. So you belong, as a result of your membership with this local league, to all 3 tiers. I wanted to just share with you and bring greetings and to say that the League is standing tall and we're doing many things. August is a very special month, by the way. It's 105 years since the anniversary of the 19th Amendment, where women finally won the right to vote. But do note, our country is 250 years old, so it's a little less than half. It's also the 60th anniversary of the important Voting Rights Act. Yet today, even now, our voting rights are under some threat. The failure to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which have added even more strength to voting rights and to be more inclusive, failed. We continue to see political partisanship fighting to game the system. We've seen police, by our president, sent to Washington, D.C. and to L.A. 3 big issues are confronting us at the national level from the perspective of the National League. One is, and I think you will hear more about it, it's rather controversial right now in California, and the League is standing in the fire right now. Mid-cycle redistricting. Perhaps some of you saw the column that I wrote that appeared, as well as our early position, because we oppose mid-cycle redistricting. For very good reasons. And although these are very terrible times, we are standing by our principles. We are also thank you. We are also very concerned about the fertilization of our police system. We are heading toward a military state. If this continues, when we suddenly have National Guard and the FBI and being taken over, and the local police by the federal government, this is not as it should be. And most recently, our Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, retweeted something that suggested that perhaps women should not be voting. So talk to me about gender equity. It's still a big fight, and our rights continue to be somewhat in flux. I'd like to share a little bit with what's happening here in California. I've been a president of the State League now for about a month and a half, and in that time, although some of it happened just a few months before, while I was vice president, we are involved in currently 3 lawsuits and very possibly a 4th. Congressman Darrell Issa from the southern part of the state has sued the Secretary of State, Shirley Weber, to disallow any election ballots being counted if they are received by the Secretary of State after Election Day. Our current law says if the ballot is postmarked Election Day, we have 7 days for that vote to be counted. He wants to do away with that. So we have actually received an intervener status in that lawsuit, and we are represented by ACLU. In another lawsuit, we are joining with ACLU in Southern California, and it'll be LWV US as well as LWV California to join in at their request of ACLU in an amicus brief as friends of court, on the lawsuit on immigration raids in Los Angeles, to fight and say that they cannot do that. And then another very important lawsuit that the state board has just agreed about a week and so ago to join in is a census on the US Census. You know it happens every 10 years. So the 2030 census is coming up, and 5 states, Louisiana, Kansas, Ohio, and West Virginia, are suing the Department of Commerce to prevent or to change the way we do our census taking so that you must be a US citizen as opposed to a resident. We have something called the residential rule, which means all the people who reside in the United States must be counted. And it has this great implications, of course, for our congressional delegation as well as for funding. And 2 states, LWV in Florida and New York, have both filed suit, and we've been asked, California as well as Texas, because we have the largest numbers of immigrants, to join in that suit. So that the board has approved us joining in, and we will be doing that shortly. But they're like all things that happen in the court. You know, there's these things that happen. And finally, we're fighting the concept of mid-cycle redistricting. So that's another area we're just discussing this at the board level. Our opinion went out early so that we could make a statement and perhaps urge us not to go in that direction. But it looks like it's a moving train, so you'll be hearing more about it. But there's so much going on, now more than ever. And I know Sam because he was our member of the city council, and I'm from San Jose, and our mayor has been a very strong proponent for many good things. And I know that you'll hear a lot about what's happening in Congress, and perhaps he will enlighten us. So I'm delighted to be the new president of the League of Women Voters of California, and I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gloria. Now I'd like to invite Palo Alto Mayor Ed Lowing to say a few words, and thank you for hosting us here in your fine city.
Thanks to the president. There you have the State of the Union right there. Yeah, welcome on behalf of the city to this event. I'm going to shortly welcome back our representative back to the district. Before that, I have one housekeeping item. I want to just announce elected officials that we know are here. There are 2 council members from Palo Alto, Pat Burt and George Liu. Are there any more that we didn't see? Council member from Saratoga City Council, Yan Liu. And then some school district, Mountain View, Los Altos, State of Goins, I think that is. I'm sorry if I missed it. Okay, I'm reading somebody else's writing, so. And Laura Casas, Foothill Community College. Bill Lambert, Mountain View Wisman School District President. And Rosa Kim, Fremont Union High School District. We have the privilege of getting a second bite from Representative Liccardo tomorrow night at our own city council, so look forward to that as well. Yeah, we're ready. I really sincerely want to welcome back to the district for a little while to take a break from that day job you've got. And on behalf of the city, I also want to thank the League of Women Voters for putting on this event so that Sam can try to help us keep up to date on the extraordinary things that are happening in Washington. Sam and I were speakers on the 4th of July platform right behind us here in Mitchell Park at our chili kickoff. And I said that day that when I put up my 4th of July flag, I'm always just I have overwhelming gratitude, actually emotional gratitude for American freedom. And for that little document called America's Constitution. I really honestly feel that every day, every 4th of July. And now our executive branch in this version of democracy is taking control of our cities, like our neighbors in Los Angeles, and even deporting people without due process court hearings. So what's going on here? This man is fighting daily against this executive overreach while sitting in the minority party in the House, and is also doing his best to fight the overreach of the Republican Congress, who make decisions on the big bad bill that include $1 billion cut to our Santa Clara County government, which is going to put literally people on the streets and probably kill people for lack of hospitalization. So we thank you for that fight. We're obviously behind you all the way on that. And today, please tell us what's going on, and please tell us maybe how we can even help you. So I give you our enthusiastic leader in the U.S. House of Representatives, Representative Sam Liccardo.
Before we get to hear from our congressman, hear about the state of Washington, such as it is, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about what the program and a few ground rules. So Congressman Liccardo will talk about, we'll start off with a state of Washington, D.C., and then after that, Eleanor Yick and I will ask questions of the congressman. These are questions that you all submitted when you did your registration or you're submitting now. We got lots of common themes when we've been receiving the questions. And so you may not hear your exact question, but we tried to group them together in themes and topics. So we're hoping to be able to touch on as many as we can. And if you have additional questions, we'll have league people coming around with cards if you have additional questions you'd like to ask. And if you've just written down a question, please raise your hand and pass it to the aisle so then a league person will pick it up. We have fine question sorters in the back of the room. Tracy Edwards, Pam Anderson, and Polly Beauvais who are reviewing them. So thank you for your work on that. We are currently living in very turbulent times, as everyone knows, and some of the questions may touch upon topics that are politically charged or concerning which members in the audience have very strongly held views. Pursuant to league practice and policy, we do ask that you leave noisemakers, signs should be left outside, and that you not interrupt speakers or the proceedings so that everyone can hear what the congressman has to say uninterrupted. And I want to let you know that this program is being recorded by Mid-Penn Media. The recordings will be posted on the websites of all the leagues. And then after Congressman answers questions, then he may also have a few closing remarks. And then we need to finish the program by 4 o'clock due to the facilities needs. So do not think us rude if we try to shoo you out a little bit at 4 o'clock. You can hang out front, but the facility wants us to leave by that time. So anyway. So with that, we welcome Congressman. Thank you so much for joining here today. I'm sure Washington, D.C. is very different from San Jose City Hall. So why don't you tell us what's going on?
Thank you, Katie. Thanks so much. And thanks to you and Eleanor and all the volunteers who are part of League of Women Voters for bringing us together. I'm very grateful for all that you do for us every day. to fight for democracy. I never thought growing up that we'd ever have to fight for fair elections and fight for democratic values. It just seemed to be something we would all naturally embrace. We're obviously in a different time. So here we are, and thank you for all your leadership. And Gloria, we're so proud that you are leading us in California, statewide. Thank you for continuing the fight. Thanks also, Ed, for your warm welcome. It's always a pleasure to be back here. Actually, I was just here yesterday. I hang out a lot at Otis Cafe. Can't resist. Yeah, great place, right? Gotta give it a plug. So my name is Sam. I work for you, and I bring greetings from the occupied territories of Washington, D.C. I won't summarize my experience in Washington. That'll take too long. But I thought I should talk a little bit about where we are in the light of recent decisions made by my friends in Congress and what that leaves us with. Because I think there's been an awful lot of discussion about the big, bad, bloated budget bill or beautiful bill, depending on your perspective. And what its impacts are, and certainly we've heard a lot about impacts on healthcare, and we'll be hearing more, I know, from throughout the county as we discuss the measure that's coming up in November. We're certainly, I think you should all be aware of the impacts on food programs. It's going to have devastating impacts on many families that struggle to be able to afford food, which of course is getting much more expensive. You probably saw a producer price index is particularly spiking on food. Guess what? Tariffs don't help. And the impacts on Pell Grants in particular, that's also going to be really devastating as we think about the impacts for our best and brightest in their efforts to be able to achieve and get ahead in a time when we know, particularly here in... Oh, keep trying? Okay, we'll keep plugging away. What is often not discussed about this legislation are two particular impacts. One is what it's doing to our next generation. And I wish this was discussed more because I think there's a particular relevance to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. A number you often probably saw in the media was a $3.3 trillion debt that is accelerated. That is, we're adding another $3.3 trillion debt in addition to the standard enormous deficits we've been running. So that's over 10 years. If you actually include interest costs, since after all, none of us get away with paying our mortgage without paying the interest also, that's now up to $4.1 trillion. So to give you a sense of the magnitude of that, that is more, 4.1 trillion, than all the debt that Joe Biden's administration may have approved with a Democratic Congress in his 4 years. This is an enormous amount of debt. And it is that message that I'm often discussing publicly because I think it's critical for us to find ways of communicating across the aisle to folks who should be caring about many of these things. At least when I grew up, I know Reagan Republicans cared a lot about debt. We should at least be able to speak in the same language about things that we should all care about. And right now, what we're doing to our children, I think, is inexcusable. And future generations, while we're taking their Pell Grants away, while we're taking their health care away and taking their food away, now we're going to make it even harder on them with more debt. The second thing I think that's not often discussed are really the income impacts from this bill, which are pretty massive. And you see this chart, which I know isn't nearly large enough, so I'll just hold it up and wave it a little bit. But this is in dollar terms. This comes out from the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan office. Congress, you know, is led by a majority of Republicans in both houses. So I can assure you this is not tainted data. But this describes, you see, 10 different bars in this bar chart. Each one of those is one decile or 10% of our population divided by income. In the wealthiest 10%, the impacts of this bill, which includes both tax cuts and spending changes, is $13,600 to the green, to the benefit in the black. So the wealthy do pretty well from this bill. Almost $14,000 a person in that decile. On the far end, out here, you see the number actually goes negative. It's $1,200 in the red. So this truly hits the poorest the hardest. And as you can imagine, the $13,600 doesn't mean nearly so much to the wealthy as the $1,200 means to the poorest among us. And this was what you see in percentage terms, in terms of percentage of income, what those wealth impacts are. Obviously, they're much more severe for the poorest. And how is that happening? Well, just to give you an example, for example, in the portion relating to Medicaid, it's, yes, $1 trillion cut over 10 years. There are work requirements, even though 2/3 of all Medicaid recipients do in fact work. We know the nature of those requirements are uniquely onerous. They're cutting benefits for legal immigrants and precluding many legal immigrants from being able to get access. They are they refuse to extend subsidies, tax subsidies that would help low and modest income Americans to be able to pay for their health insurance on the exchange. That is also going to make healthcare more expensive for all of us. And they're removing the ability of within individual states to be able to charge provider taxes, which helps to supplement the state's efforts to support, in California, Medi-Cal recipients. So what this means overall is 22 million Americans are going to be paying more for their health insurance, and approximately 15 million Americans, again, according to the nonpartisan CVO, 15 million Americans will be without health insurance who currently are protected by Medicaid. This is devastating, obviously. And within our congressional district here, District 16, it's about 22,000 of us. And we are a very wealthy district relative to other districts, among the most wealthy in the country by far, the top 1 or 2%. So these impacts are real. Health is just one aspect of them. Obviously, taxes, food supplements, et cetera, those are all baked into this formula. So I wanted you to be able to get an overview of the bill. There's going to be a lot of other things we're going to be talking about, but I just wanted you to be aware of that. Now that I've depressed everybody, let me just leave you with one thought from Albert Camus, from the grave. When there is no hope, it is incumbent upon us to create it. Camus tells us. It's incumbent upon us to create it. And I just wanted to thank, as I look around the room, I see a lot of familiar faces of people who have been deeply engaged in trying to create hope in one way or another. And you create hope in a lot of ways. You create hope by supporting nonprofit organizations that are deeply engaged in supporting members of our community who are suffering as a result of this in so many ways, whether they're unhoused, they're immigrants, folks who need access to health care, whatever it might be. So thank you for investing your time, your treasure, your talent in those ways. Thank you for getting engaged politically, whether it's through organizations like Indivisible, who are out there hustling, and I know, yes, a few folks, yes. Thank you for what you're doing and making those phone calls, and if you're driving out to the Central Valley, knocking on doors, and all the things that you're doing to give us hope. At the end of this discussion, I'd like to talk about some data points that should indicate that there is hope. There is hope. The work that you're doing in many ways through the League of Women Voters to ensure people are well informed, through your everyday efforts to try to support a community that is struggling. Thank you. I'll leave it there, and I'll come back to that topic shortly, but I'd like to get to your questions and our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. I have the pleasure of asking the first question, and as Katie mentioned, we organize the questions by theme. And as we get new questions, we try to make sure that it falls onto one of those categories, and if it doesn't, we add it onto our list, and we're going to attempt to ask as many questions as we can. The first theme is about preserving democracy, something that we're all concerned about, and it has an A and B section, and most of the questions are organized like this. And the A section is kind of general, and then the B section is usually more specific about your actions or some specific things that have gone on. So, about preserving democracy, what is the most effective action we can take to reverse the anti-democracy actions of our current administration? And then I'll ask you some other specifics, but if you would respond to that first.
Thank you for the easy question first. Look, a lot of you are already involved in it, so I think I'm probably preaching to the choir. The bottom line is, in a constitutional republic like this, we speak through the ballot box. That's how, if we want to throw the bums out, we throw them out. And if we like whoever we got elected, we support them.
Give me the two.
I think that the effort that I'm already seeing emerge, and I know, because I was just talking to Adam Gray a little while ago, and he said their folks are already mobilizing in his district, for example. What people can do now to help us get people out to vote is incredibly important, and that means getting people registered now for 2026. And particularly those folks who may be less likely to vote, and let's be clear about that, that's young people. As we look around, many of us are my age, approximately. We need to find the youngins, because it turns out they don't vote near they don't bat their weight at the ballot box. And what we've seen in the data, it's pretty interesting, as you see, I'm trying to remember which polling agency, it was a pretty respected one, came out 3 days ago with looking at Trump's numbers, which are now, I think, 38% for approval, 60% for disapproval, where they poll Trump voters, folks who voted for Trump. The largest drop-off in support is from those Trump supporters who are between the ages of 18 and 34. Guess what? Young adults have woken up. This is not the guy they thought they were voting for. And so this is our opportunity. We need to get to young adults. I'd also note, by the way, what we're seeing, particularly in border districts through a lot of voting data or polling data, is that Latinos who supported Trump have considerably backed off. Now, among Latino voters nationally, 70% do not support Trump. So guess what? We've got a big Central Valley, regardless of whatever happens with this redistricting measure this November. We are going to need to get out to the Central Valley, and to the extent you're engaged, and however you want to be engaged, through your party, through organizations like Indivisible and others, please do get engaged, because we have enormous opportunity here in California with lots of battleground districts. And I'll be out there with you all. I'll also be raising money for a lot of those folks, but we can talk about that another time. All right.
And then the second part is, what are you doing specifically to resist the current administration's overreach?
Okay. Well, that's a long conversation. I'll give you two examples, and then we'll stop, because I know we got to go through a lot of this stuff. On Tuesday, I'm going to introduce an interesting bill relating to the use of our National Guard. Now, Donald Trump appointed 3 separate generals and a Secretary of Defense, all of whom have since told us, this is all in his first term, have now publicly said that they warned Trump to stop using the military for domestic law enforcement. And it turns out that professionals in the military understand the perils of domestic deployment of the military. This is, I believe, is possibly the greatest threat to our democracy. And we need to be incredibly vigilant about it. So I'm introducing a bill on Tuesday with so far about 50 co-sponsors. Sadly, all of one party. I'm going to keep working on this. That would require that before the administration deploys a National Guard, it has to report to Congress the specific legal basis for the deployment. And that's important. I'll get to that in a moment. But it's important for them to be precise, because the law is very clear about what you can use the military for and not for. And it has to describe subsequently in a written report and then with testimony before Congress about what the cost is of the deployment, what interactions with civilians there have been, if there have been any adverse interactions with civilians, and there has to be a clear description of whether there have been any impacts on other needed deployments of National Guard, for example, for a national disaster response. And this is only in deployments that don't involve natural disasters. So the point of this is to create clear records and to hold the administration accountable. And look, I know that we're not going to magically get a bunch of Republican votes for the notion that Trump can't do as he pleases with the National Guard. What I'm hoping to do is we can get some Republican votes for the notion that we should all be transparent about how the National Guard is utilized. And the reason why we want precision in exactly the explanation or the justification for the deployment is because we know constitutional law and statutory law is very clear about how exactly the military can be deployed. In LA, we did not see, at least I was not aware of, direct use of military for law enforcement. I think wisely, the calmer minds in the military said we're going to use them solely for protection of federal buildings and for protection of federal personnel who are involved in their jobs, but not actually for law enforcement. That's a good thing. Again, wiser minds prevailed, I think, within our military branches. We want to ensure that continues to be the case. And so that's one example. Okay, so another example is something we did back in February. There have been several bills like this since, but I introduced a bill, and then there was a companion bill that Chris Murphy introduced in the Senate, we introduced together, to ban any federal official from introducing their own or sponsoring their own stock, commodity, or let's just say digital asset. Now, there has not been a flood of Republican support for that yet. And no, it's not going to pass. But I'm on the Financial Services Committee. The whole strategy with that was this. We're trying to figure out ways to communicate across the aisle, right? We've got to communicate across the aisle to all the folks in America who voted for the guy and may not be getting all the information because they may not be reading the New York Times, right? They may not read, in fact, we know they're not watching CNN. So anyway, so what we did is in the first 2 lines of the press release, we described how 700,000 Americans had invested in the Trump meme coin, this pump and dump scheme. And by the way, there were Chinese investors who made hundreds of millions on this because, of course, they invested early and got out early. Then in the dump part of it, of course, the value drops enormously. Those 700,000 investors lost collectively more than $2 billion. According to the Wall Street Journal, not exactly a liberal rag, Trump and his family made off with about $320 million in fees. So we wanted folks to see that 700,000 Americans had collectively lost $2 billion. And we knew they may not be reading the New York Times, but the good news is all those cryptocurrency online newsletters and journals and e-news and all those other things that folks might be looking at on the other side of the ideological barriers, they would be able to see that. And sure enough, those media sources repeated that fact, which is helpful. So what we're trying to do is strategically put out legislation that will help us communicate across the other side of the aisle. There's a whole lot of other stuff we're doing that's mostly boring, and a lot of it involves, for example, litigation. I'm working on a litigation rapid response team with lots of recovering lawyers like me, and you know, the heavy lifting is being done by Democracy Forward and Public Citizen, a lot of those kinds of organizations. If you happen to support them, please continue to do so. They're doing great work. And with their leadership, we've secured more than 190 injunctions against this administration by Republican and Democratic appointed judges. In fact, there have been probably have the count wrong. I think it's now 9 federal judges appointed by Donald Trump who have issued injunctions stopping or stalling the administration. So that is obviously having, measured success. I think we're very successful, for example, on the birthright citizenship issue, less successful on others. We're going to keep fighting. And then we're doing other stuff, obviously, on the electoral side. And I won't bore you with all that, but suffice to say, I'm doing the best I can. You may have seen something in the Wall Street Journal last week about some of our efforts to try to see if we can encourage Silicon Valley to embrace my party in a different way. So we're that is for another discussion when we're not on public property. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question concerns redistricting. Where do you stand on Governor Newsom's proposal for mid-decade redistricting in California?
Yeah. Boy, that's a doozy, huh? So I think it is a very unfortunate, very distasteful, but necessary measure to counter what I think is an authoritarian effort directly from the White House. Let's face it, they're redrawing the maps at the White House for Texas. This is not a democratic process in Texas by any stretch. And what I can say about California is we're subjecting this to a vote. And if people don't like it, they don't have to vote for it. So I haven't been deeply involved in this, I'll be the first to say, but I will say, what ultimately persuaded me to do this is I thought about my first couple days in office and how we have to certify the presidential election. That's your duty when you come in, if you're at that every 4 years, right? And I just thought about what the prospects were for our country if we do not have what I would regard as a fair approach to getting folks elected that can represent all of us in the House of Representatives. And now it's up to a Republican manipulated majority in the House of Representatives to certify or not certify whatever the outcome is 3.5 years from now. I am deeply concerned based on all the behavior I have seen that there's not nearly enough courage on the other side of the aisle for folks to do the right thing. And January 6th has driven a lot of courageous Republicans out of Congress. Folks have gotten the lesson very clearly. The fear that I hear from my colleagues when they have honest moments with me, the fear they express is not just political. Let me say that again. The fear that my Republican colleagues express to me is not just political. When Joni Ernst was physically threatened when she stood up against Pete Hegseth's nomination, there was a reason. When, after January 6th, I know there were several threats towards several Republican members of the House. I have had a colleague on the Republican side tell me, Sam, I want to get on that bill, but I have 5 kids, and I'm worried. So we are in a different era. We cannot bring a knife to a gunfight. As long as we are doing this legally, we are doing it in a very way that's very transparent, obviously with an election, I will support it.
Thank you.
I will also concede, while Gloria's here, reasonable minds can disagree. Thank you.
And I do want to mention again that we ask you not to applaud with certain answers, not to boo for certain answers. We want everybody to feel comfortable with that.
I'm really comfortable with applause, though, so.
Okay. The next question is about dismantling federal agencies, which we're all concerned about. What can Congress do to stop the dismantling of federal agencies created and funded by Congress, and where the Supreme Court has allowed mass firings of the department's employees without explanation, and in particular, your position on the Department of Education?
So the dismantling has come from two sources, right? We had Doge, and they had their run, and then Elon and Trump had the divorce from the bromance, and so we've seen the trajectory of the influence of Doge decline. But what we have seen clearly is legislation from Congress, both in the budget and with the rescission bill, that is having devastating impacts certainly on funding. So let me say this with regard to Doge. I did introduce a bill, again, with lots of support from my colleagues on one side of the aisle. It's called Protect Our Communities and Constitution Act, that would give every individual American a private right of action to sue individuals within the executive branch who violate Article 1 of the Constitution, which holds essentially that Congress has the power of the purse. And so that laws, appropriation laws that are passed by Congress and signed by the president are in fact the law of the land, and you don't get to decide you want to spend money otherwise. A relatively unremarkable proposition. In 1974, Richard Nixon decided he would try some variation of his own. Congress didn't like it. They passed a 1974 act called the Impoundments Act, which prohibited all this stuff, except it didn't have any real teeth. It gave the authority to a presidentially elected or appointed individual in Congress, comptroller, the ability to bring an injunction, and essentially there's no real teeth to that. So we want to give teeth to that 1974 Act and to Article 1 by empowering individual Americans. Now, ain't going to pass this cycle. We know that. We want to tee it up because if we can get back in the majority, we want to be able to ensure this kind of thing does not happen again. I think a great failure as we look back in the Biden administration was, hey, we saw some of this coming. Why didn't we do more to button up the holes in our institutions then, so we couldn't see this kind of stuff coming? Anyway, that's a small piece of it. Now, what are we going to do about Congress? Now, that's about Doge, right? Turns out Congress has certainly done its share of damage as well, along with the administration. Well, guess what? We have a majoritarian system. There's not a darn thing that we can do after the fact. I can tell you, we introduced 500 amendments to this budget bill the first time it came up, and then another 400. This is just on the House side. I don't even know what the Senate did. More than 400 the second time. We were debating amendments in the Rules Committee. I think my turn came up at like 4:30 in the morning, and so I argued vehemently, of course, half asleep, and they voted down every one of those 500 amendments. So this is what we got. There's a majoritarian system. Turns out that we get the government we vote for. I'm sorry I can't give you more hope, but that is the law we've had. Now, we are starting to see buyer's remorse. You probably saw, I think it was Josh Hawley came out with a bill within a few days of the bill passing. Republican Josh Hawley on the Senate decided, those Medicaid cuts weren't so great. I'm going to introduce a bill that's going to protect everybody from Medicaid cuts. Well, thanks a lot. You voted for the budget. So I expect we're going to see more buyer's remorse. And as that emerges, particularly in rural communities that are going to be cut off, for example, from national public radio support for basic emergency radio service that you might need in a place like Wyoming, right? Or cuts that are closing clinics in Nebraska, or cuts that as we think about food supplementary programs that are hurting not just millions of Americans who need the food, but millions of farmers who need those supports. I think we're going to have more opportunity in the months ahead to find coalitions of folks who have buyer's remorse. The question is, are they going to have the courage to stand up? And that's, time will tell. I'm just going to have to do all I can to try to communicate and work with them. Let me just say one last thing, just about agencies generally. I'll speak for my own party. I think most Americans are perfectly happy if you eliminate a few federal agencies. They don't want their benefits impacted. They don't want their services impacted, but they're perfectly happy to see an alphabet soup of federal agencies they don't understand, that seem to cost a lot of money, get eliminated. And we can attribute that to all kinds of things, but I think we need collectively to recognize that our job is not to stand up and to protect the bureaucracy. Our job is to protect the critical services that Americans need. And in some cases, we may be able to deliver them better and in different ways. You know, David Brooks said that Trump is often the wrong answer to the right problem. Let me just suggest that DOGE was the wrong answer to the right problem. You know, there is a lot of need to dramatically improve efficiencies. We've got a lot of bloat in government, and yes, we need to do it the intelligent way. Now, it would help if you don't fire all your inspector generals, because those are usually the experts at finding where the waste is, right? So let's do it in a sensible way. But I think we need to stop talking about defending departments and agencies. I think we need to start talking about how do we ensure services get delivered more effectively, better. Now, with regard to Department of Education, I think they perform a lot of very essential services. I think it's very clear that Small Business Administration, if that's the latest plan that the administration has for taking on student loans, is totally understaffed and not going to be capable of administering that. On the other hand, look, could there be better ways of assembling this? Sure, quite possibly. But let's have that very public discussion. Let's not leave it up to some 22-year-old to decide that they're going to just rearrange the boxes on the bar chart.
Thank you. We have a number of questions relating to immigration. So we'll start off, another easy topic, yeah. Most Americans support some kind of comprehensive immigration reform. What, if any, plan do you support?
I'll support anything we can get passed. I support more high-skill visas. I support more green cards. I think we should give every student who graduates from one of our colleges, universities, should staple the green card to the diploma. I think we need to find a pathway for 12 million of our neighbors who have been here in most cases, the majority of them more than 15 years, building families, some of them building businesses, building communities. They should have a pathway to legal citizenship, and we should ensure, obviously, they're following the law, as overwhelmingly they are. They should have that path. We should be doing the same for dreamers. And so, look, obviously that's not going to pass. I'm a member of the Hispanic Caucus.
Unless you get the majority.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point.
Sir,
Yeah.
we've asked that you
Yeah.
not interrupt.
Yeah.
So
It's all a fair point. Yeah, I get it. But, you know, hey, we've got a year and a half to focus on what we can do now. And love to wave the magic wand and have that majority emerge. In the meantime, what do we do? Well, we've been working with a group called Forward.us, maybe you may be familiar with. And the idea is, you know, how can we work with some of those employers out there who understand the severe impacts of the current immigration policies on their industries? This is not just tech, right? This is agriculture, this is healthcare, this is construction. There's a lot of industries that are being devastated because it turns out, guess what? We need immigrants. I don't need to tell all of you, we live in a county where 40% of our adults are born in a foreign country. Of course, we need immigrants. And immigrants have been the secret sauce of our success here in Silicon Valley. Obviously, we need to tell that story better. So the idea of working with Forward.us is to try to find some ideas that we can get some Republicans on board with, right? Working with some of those employers in red states so they can tell their story. That's going to be critically important. There's some bills out there that, you know, are interesting. I know there's one Republican from Florida who actually was willing to introduce a bill on, I think, on Dreamers and undocumented immigrants. God love her. She's not getting any other support, unfortunately. We've got other colleagues who have suggested comprehensive plans. I think that's great. I was there in 2013 advocating on Capitol Hill for a comprehensive form. We were incredibly close, many of you may know who've been involved in this effort, incredibly close to getting a bill passed. We had enough votes on the Republican side to get a comprehensive bill passed in the House. We couldn't get leadership to let it get to the floor. And since that time, I think there's been a lot of reckoning, And in my own caucus, the Hispanic caucus, where we always insisted we have to have a comprehensive package, we can't have anything less, I think there's a change in thinking. At this point, we'll take anything, right? Let's just, if dreamers are what Republicans will agree to, let's take it, right? Let's do whatever we can. We desperately need immigration in this country. Now, there's lots of folks who may fairly point to whatever's happened at the border as having been poorly enforced. And I think the opportunity for us, and I've had conversations with a few of my Republican colleagues, is how can we say to you and to the American people that you can declare victory on the border? Donald Trump won the border, great. Now can we have a sensible immigration law? I think if there's going to be any solution in this divided Congress, it's going to have to emerge from that. Give the guy what he needs or his ego needs, give him all the praise he wants for the border. Now let's get immigrants in a place where they feel safe in our country.
Thank you. And two more sort of more specific questions related to immigration. One is, what can Congress do to address the significant backlogs in our immigration system? And something that's more Silicon Valley related is, as people probably know, H-1B visas allowed U.S. employers to hire foreign workers with specialties, special occupations that require special knowledge. So what's going on there, and what's your position on the appropriate number or HB1 visas?
So HB1 visas, I know, are very controversial. There's no question there's been a lot of abuses, and we need some reforms to curtail those abuses. Some of those abuses have been curtailed, but there are more. But I do believe we need more visas, not fewer. The number of visas has not changed in the last 2 decades. Clearly, the need has grown. So, look, this valley has been built by immigrants, and we need to continue to enable the best and the brightest to come to our country. The alternative is we can just send them back to China, India, Latin America, everywhere else, and they can go start companies and compete against us. And right now, China's doing pretty well already. I don't want to help them anymore. So I support more H-1Bs. We were hoping there might be some opportunity when Elon was chummy with the president to actually make some progress on this. I think we're less optimistic now. And with regard to backlog, in this big, bad, beautiful bill, whatever you call this, the only 2 areas of substantial increase in funding were defense and border security. I am hopeful that the ineptitude of this administration to be able to hire and do things that we've seen so far will continue, and though that money will not get spent quickly, and if we have another bite at this apple, with a successful 2026, we could convert some of that money that is currently spent on border to improving processing, because we have, I think, a 3 million case backlog for asylum. And we've got a lot of backlogs. We've got a lot of work to do. So we need some resources there. We need more legal immigration while we enforce against, obviously, border intrusions, particularly if there's concern about criminal activity.
Thank you. The next question is about the SAVE Act, which means Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act. And just a little bit of information for you in the audience. This bill, currently under consideration in the U.S. Senate after passing the House in April 2025, would require individuals to provide documentary proof of U.S. citizenship when registering to vote in federal elections. It aims to prevent non-citizens from voting in federal elections. What proactive measures are you and the rest of Congress taking to prepare for messaging your constituents should the SAVE Act pass?
Great question. I think the grave concerns that many folks have with the SAVE Act, just to be clear, if you are not aware, I know League of Women Voters participants are, particularly with women who change their names, we expect there's an awful lot of folks that are going to get left off of voter rolls, and in many cases not know about it. And there's a lot of other impacts too, but there's no question this is an effort to shrink the number of folks who can legally vote who would otherwise be lawfully able to vote. We have expected and assumed that the filibuster would hold in the Senate. That seems to be the case so far. Obviously, I voted against this in the House. All indications have been that that is holding. Obviously, if we start to detect that there are some Democrats with wobbly knees on this, then I will be jumping into action, working with Democracy Forward and League of Women Voters and others to figure out how exactly I know they're thinking of it. They're working hard. I can't tell you I'm the one doing the thinking because we're still drinking out of the fire hose of all the other legislation coming at us. I think this becomes much more a focus for us if we start to see Democrats moving in the Senate. But it appears so far that this thing's not moving.
The next question concerns Medicare. How will or can you protect Medicare and Social Security benefits?
Well, if you, through a very narrow lens of just focus on Social Security, you should feel better about the fact that every time the word Social Security came up during this budget debate, there was a pretty vehement response to shoot down any suggestion that anyone would touch Social Security. So it turns out that Republicans can read polls too. So Social Security would appear to be relatively safe. Now, what we know has happened, particularly with DOGE, is a tremendous gutting of a lot of Social Security offices, particularly field offices. Has not happened here in this area, fortunately, but we've been keeping a watchful eye. And some really crazy rules about making people show up in person when they want to change their status. And often these are people obviously with disabilities who don't have access to transportation, and God forbid you continue to provide service by phone. So I wrote lots of letters with lots of other members, and I know many of you did too, to some of those kinds of procedural changes that were just going to make it a lot harder for people to get the benefits they're entitled to. And we were able to beat that back. Now, we're going to continue to see this, so we got to keep fighting. On the Medicare side, all the discussion publicly has been about Medicaid, and appropriately, this $1 trillion cut plan for 10 years. And the assumption has been that Medicare won't get touched, or at least that's what the majority's been saying. In fact, based on what we think we understand of what's going to happen to the deficit with this bill, because guess what? I know you're going to be shocked by this, but Donald Trump made about $5 trillion worth of promises for tax cuts, and he didn't know how to pay for them. And turns out Republicans in Congress figured out how to pay for about $900 billion of the $5 trillion. So we've got a lot more to pay for, and they're going under a whole different set of assumptions. You've got independent entities like the Congressional Budget Office, like the GAO, like Wharton School, like the Budget Lab at Yale, that all are saying the same thing about budget deficits and what's going to happen with debt. And then you've got sort of the make-believe world that the Senate and House majority have invented, where you just assume that, well, all that deficit was created through the 2017 law. That we'll just imagine that's zero and start there as our baseline. And then if you imagine that, then you don't have to worry about deficits, which sounds great, right? Unfortunately, we occupy planet Earth, and what we know is the way CBO and all the independent sources are going to score this, we're going to be pretty deep in deficit land by year 3 of this budget, and that's going to trigger something called sequestration. And guess what? Medicare is subject to sequestration. Those are across-the-board cuts. And the current estimates from a couple reliable sources are as much as $500 billion over 10 years of cuts to Medicare, not just Medicaid. So we're all very much threatened by this, right? The math doesn't work. I love tax cuts too. There are plenty of tax cuts I have proposed. It turns out we have to be adults and figure out what we can pay for. So we're going to have to go back, I hope, when we have the opportunity with the right alignment in Congress, and understand what exactly we can pay for, or else this sequestration is going to have real impacts.
Thank you. The next question is about getting bills passed in such a hyper-partisan environment. So in a time of hyper-partisanship, how are you forging relationships with your Republican colleagues on difficult issues? Are you finding any common ground? And then specifically some examples of legislation you're working on that have bipartisan support.
It is a pretty challenging time to get anything passed if you're a Democrat these days. I'm fortunate to be on a committee. It's financial services. It has jurisdiction over, of course, banking and insurance and crypto and all kinds of international money laundering, all kinds of fun stuff like that. But it also has jurisdiction over housing. And you know, some of you may know I wrote this book when I was running for office, and I put it online. I think it's still online. About a whole bunch of ideas that I thought we could try to at least try to get passed in a divided Congress. And if you didn't read it, don't worry. My mom didn't read it either. So I'm testing out some of these ideas. And what I believed going in, it turns out to be true, which is, look, you're not going to make progress with the headline issues, right? The ones that everyone's fighting over. Because the stakes are too high, and literally there are folks on the other side of the aisle who are telling me they cannot be seen on a Democratic bill on this issue. Okay. So two lessons. One is make it a Republican bill. Don't make it a Democratic bill, right? I learned as mayor, the most effective way of getting things done is make sure somebody else gets credit. The second thing is you got to pick those issues that are in the interstices between all the issues that people are fighting over. Now, I'm a Democrat who believes we need to do a lot of things to tackle our housing crisis. Housing happens to be one of those things under jurisdiction. So I know there's things that Republicans will never agree to, like we need quadruple the number of housing vouchers. Ain't gonna happen. But we do agree on the basic notion that we need a much more housing supply. Right? Housing supply is constrained in this country. Lots of studies show it. That's affecting all of us at every level. So I've got 3 bills. 2 have already been introduced, one that's coming out in about 2 weeks, that have a Republican co-sponsor. And I always pick somebody who's senior to me. We've got 2 subcommittee chairs and 1 committee chair on them to make sure that people know that this got a good Republican stamp on it. And they're focused on housing supply in different ways. So I'll give you one example, and then I'll promise to stop talking. I'll bore everyone on it. But so when I was mayor of San Jose, you know, we were just starting to talk about ADUs. You may remember probably, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago. And before the state law passed that made things easy, we started to figure out, hey, we've got a lot of single family lots here, and if people want ADUs, we should make it easier for people to be able to build their own ADUs. Well, of course, they have to go through a city planning process, and then you need like an act of Congress and then an edict from the Pope. And it turns out that like residents are not developers. They don't want to have to navigate all this. It's really hard. So we figured out that we could talk to some folks in the private sector who make prefabricated modular models. And there's some really good looking, attractive models. You should go online and check it out if you're interested. And so we had a whole bunch of these companies submit like 20 of these models in advance to the city planning department. And so we would approve the plans in advance. And then we put them on our website, and we just tell residents, hey, if you pick one of these 20, you get your permit in a day online, automatically. So nobody has to play developer and get a lobbyist, right? So we saw the number of permits go from like 15 a year to 900. It was amazing. And I thought, oh, what a brilliant mayor I am. Except we found out they weren't getting built. Like only half of them were getting built because people couldn't figure out a way to actually finance, to pay for them, especially if you're a modest income homeowner, you don't have a lot of equity, and you know maybe you're locked in on your mortgage, all those things, right? So people couldn't get financing, and banks won't touch these on second loans, and so for all kinds of reasons. So what I decided to do was, with a Republican colleague, Andrew Garbarino, we went to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and FHFA and said, look, can we figure out a way you can backstop these loans just like you backstop ordinary mortgages, so we can reduce interest rates, get banks to be willing to do the lending, so they'll be a little more courageous. You guys can go sell these on the secondary market and make money, it's great. And we need to insure these as well. So we went to FHFA, and they all said, okay, there's a way we can do this. So we're introducing a bill now to require all these quasi-federal agencies, not really agencies, but they're going to be privatized soon, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and others, to backstop these seconds that homeowners will have so they can then finance the construction of these backyard homes. We know it can work. What we saw in Canada, in the city of Vancouver, a third of single-family lots have backyard homes on them. So we know that, you know, if people have the ability to build them, they will. And this may be one modest solution that'll help thousands of families. Obviously, we got to do a lot more.
Thank you. Now, this next one, once again, please let me remind you, let the speaker speak, and don't interrupt. So this is on Gaza. What is your reaction to Prime Minister Netanyahu's recent statement about taking control of Gaza City?
I think it's a terrible mistake, and I'm not the only one who thinks that. The IDF, his military, is telling him it's a very bad mistake, and I think his military understands why. And I think that's bad for Israel, and it's certainly bad for Palestinians in Gaza.
Thank you. My next question is on the business environment, and it actually has three parts, so I'll do them separately. What is your assessment of the condition of business, large and small, in Silicon Valley? What are the concerns you're hearing about, and what are you doing to address those concerns?
You know, to be incredibly, to generalize enormously, small business is struggling enormously with fast rising costs. Costs are already incredibly high here. I don't think the tariffs are helping. I don't think high interest rates are helping. And lots of small, medium-sized businesses are struggling enormously. You know, I think there are plenty of big tech companies are doing well. I would say there are industries where the companies are not doing so well. They don't necessarily want to speak out about it, but I'll just give an example. Biotech, I spent some time on a roundtable with biotech executives, and it turns out that when you gut funding to the NIH, you terrorize universities and cut all their funding, you scare off talented immigrant researchers and scientists and students, and you enact tariffs on some of the critical equipment they need, that all those things are not helpful to a healthy biotech ecosystem. And I could go on and on about other kinds of feedback I'm getting from other industries. If you're in fintech, you're pretty happy right now. Those companies are doing great. I was an original co-sponsor on a bill that would provide some rules and long overdue rules on stablecoin, for example, and I think we're going to see a lot of financial services companies expand in that space. But I would say in many tech industries, there is a surprising, I think the public would be surprised the extent to which there is a deep amount of worry. A deep amount of worry because they know the secret to their success is talent. And right now, we are not a country where talented people want to be from somewhere else. And if you're a researcher looking for NSF grants or NIH grants or working at a university, even if you're American, you're looking to go somewhere else. And so I know that there's been a lot of folks prostrating themselves on the holy altar of Trump. I get it. You know, cutting their $1 million checks to his parade or whatever they're doing. But I'm talking to a lot of the folks in the C-suites, and there's a lot of deep-seated anxiety and a certain deep understanding that an approach that is being embraced now on a whole bunch of different fronts. I mentioned immigration, but it's actually a whole lot of things. Tariffs are of deep concern. I could tell you, I talked to a C-suite member at Walmart. I know not a local company, but I can tell you that the price increases are coming. And they know it, and it's affecting them. So if it's affecting them, it's affecting a whole lot of other companies. So what am I doing about it? Well, I'd like to say I've got a magic wand somewhere. I don't. I'm doing everything I can. If you look on I got 2 different sets of platforms on social media. So this is totally arcane, but they have the official side social media that your folks in your office post, about whatever you're doing on legislation. And then you have your personal accounts, which you can use for political campaigns and stuff, but you can't mix them. The law is very, very rigid, so you can't mix them up. So I can be snarky on my political side, and that's where I'm usually snarky. And what I'm trying to do is post as many articles as I can from the Wall Street Journal, because we've got to like communicate across the divide about just how destructive some of these decisions are to our economy. So folks, regardless of their ideology, will sort of get it. And so I'm trying to do a lot of that. When we had the Fed chairman come and testify in front of my committee, 3 weeks ago, I asked him a lot of questions about, for example, hey, how do you feel about the quality and objectivity of data that's being produced? It should be a grave concern to all of us, right? What happened recently with the Bureau of Labor Statistics head, who, by the way, was described by a conservative think tank economist, American Enterprise Institute, as horribly incompetent. That was on the record, right? And so I feel like my job here in Silicon Valley is to be able to speak to the tech community and to folks who may not be aligned with my party, who need to understand in real terms what they're not getting from Fox TV.
You. And another part, it's not directly related, but it is in some ways. Most constituents want common sense controls on AI and its potential misuse. Can you describe your work in this area?
Yeah, I'm just starting to roll up my sleeves on it because I'm not on the committee with jurisdiction over it. So, and as you've noticed, there hasn't been an enormous amount of progress on this generally in Congress, nor on much else relating to data privacy or Section 230 or a lot of other areas of tech where I think we're all long overdue. Ro Khanna and I are working on a bill focused on watermarking. And the reason why we're starting there is I think I've heard loud and clear from folks in the industry, and I think it's intuitively true that government's not going to do a terribly good job regulating the algorithms or regulating the code. There's a lot of desire to impose safety tests and so forth, but nobody really believes in the efficacy of any of those safety tests yet. There's a lot of competing ideas and arguments about what exactly is safe, and it hasn't been well defined in the industry. But one thing we can do is we can regulate outcomes. So what I want to focus on is how do we take existing laws that we know prohibit things like fraud and prohibit misrepresentation, all the things that we know, many of the things we know that AI is going to make much worse for us, and focus on those outcomes. So the idea of watermarking is how can we mandate companies to insert code that tags whether or not, that indicates clearly whether or not an image, a voice, or text is actually genuine or produced through AI. And turns out the technology is not great on this, that you can set up a whole scheme for watermarking, and folks who are smart enough will eventually figure out a way around it. So I think what we probably need to do is create a moving standard that is not controlled by Congress, because we're not smart enough to keep up with it. We need to create an independent entity, a body that can, folks in academia and industry and so forth that really understand the technology, that can set standards. And we hold companies to those standards. And if they want to have protections like so many folks in social media companies have, for example, under Section 230, where they don't get sued because somebody says something mean on their platform, well, if these companies want immunity from civil lawsuit, then they got to stick to those standards, right? If they go under those standards, well, good luck with the lawyers. And I think that's the approach we need, and so that's what we're working on. Working still on the text, and we're doing a lot of outreach with the industry. We hope that that will be something coming out very soon.
Thank you. Our local governments are taking significant financial hits with the recent cutbacks in federal funding to our hospitals, schools, and safety net services. Are you working on any legislation or involved in any other effort to address or mitigate these impacts?
The short answer is I don't have anything hopeful to say here. And so I just want to apologize to Ed and Pat, who are fine public servants here in Palo Alto, and all the others who are here, because I know you're going to have some very unhappy public meetings. I recall being an elected official during the Great Recession. It was no fun making those cuts, and people are very upset with you, and you have to cut because you have to balance a budget. Particularly true at the county right now. They're really under a lot of pressure. So I know the county's got a measure coming to us in November. I think right now local communities are on their own trying to figure it out. And hopefully we're going to try to figure it out together, and happy to support in various ways for local communities to figure out that pathway. But there is no magic wand in Congress as long as we do not have a majority control that is going to fix the pain that's been wrought. So it is a very difficult time, I know, and so let's all have grace and patience with one another as local communities struggle with these very serious cuts.
Thank you. We've reached the time in our program where I'm going to ask the last question. We had enough questions for probably 3 hours, and so we distilled them down as best we could. And we do thank you again for coming, and I'm hoping in your closing remarks, in addition to maybe any other topic you might want to address, you ran on a platform that included housing affordability and homelessness, reduced cost of living, public safety and crime prevention, climate action and infrastructure, tech workforce support and innovation, and protecting democracy and rights. What are you doing to accomplish this platform?
How much time do I have?
What do you believe is achievable during your term? Thank you.
The short answer is not a damn thing. So I mentioned that book, which had all those things and more. And in the very first page of the book, you'll notice what I wrote was a very clear disclaimer, which was, hey, by the way, I'm a first-term member of the minority party, which biologists characterize as the lowest form of human life. And that may mean that we're not actually going to get all this stuff or even any of this stuff. This whole book is about letting you know how I think about solving problems. And hey, well, here are some ideas I have about how we might solve a few. So some of the stuff in there, for example, talking about housing, I mentioned I got 3 bills we're working on now that are moving through the process, and I'm hopeful those 3 bills will get swallowed up in larger legislation that Republicans are moving through this fall. I mentioned one on ADUs. There's another one which allow community development block grants to be used more flexibly to build affordable housing, another to help eliminate barriers for affordable housing construction right now that exist under federal law. So the short answer is we're going to continue to work on those ideas. These are not in the category of home runs. These are singles, right? This is the small ball that you have to play when you don't hold the cards. And so we'll continue to keep pushing. But I wanted to say thank you. Thank you to each one of you for taking time on a Sunday afternoon. I know you have a lot of better things to do than listen to me talk on a beautiful day like this. So thank you for coming. It says a lot about your commitment to our country and our community that you would be disengaged. So please, when you are clapping, clap for yourselves, because the fact you're here is very impressive to me, and it should be to you as well. And thank you to League of Women Voters. I just wanted to say, I started with Camus, and I did that because I thought it would make me sound smarter. But I did it because I think there is a lot of reason for hope, and folks often, and in my many conversations I have with very frustrated, angry, fearful people these days, and I'm not diminishing the importance, I'm not diminishing any of those emotions, they're real. But there is hope, and it is incumbent upon us to keep creating it. I mentioned that Donald Trump's approval rating is now 38%. His disapproval rating is now 60%. That is not the magic that just happened because some folks woke up and decided, hey, my food bills haven't gone down. It's because they're seeing people out in the streets. they're seeing their neighbors out in the streets, right? They're seeing people who look like them who are saying, hey, not everybody's happy here. So for those of you who have been engaged, thank you, and please keep staying engaged. You know, we're seeing this push for redistricting from the president, literally coming right from the White House, for a reason. They are in a corner politically. It turns out that this horrible bill they passed was deeply unpopular, not just among Democrats, but among Republicans too. All our polling showed it. And so they are scrambling, and they're trying to do everything they can to hold on. And what we're seeing in the data is reflected in what we're seeing in their actions, not just in this desperate push for redistricting, but in so many other ways. When Elise Stefanik, for example, was appointed to be UN ambassador, great gig, right? Any member of the House would, well, some members of the House would love to have it. And then Trump pulled it back. And he said something I thought that was telling when he pulled it back. He actually said, hey, I think we really need her in the House. And he was right. Now, Elise Stefanik won her district by double digits each of the last 4 elections. By double digits. And he's worried about her leaving her seat in New York because it turns out a lot of New Yorkers are pretty ticked off. We saw results in the state race in Pennsylvania and the judges' races in Wisconsin and 2 federal races in Florida, although we didn't win those 2, but we saw the movement between 10 and 15 points from the red to the blue in those races, which we knew Republicans were going to win. We are seeing outcomes which show the American public have had enough. So I want to tell you, it is working more than you think it is. More than 190 judges have imposed injunctions, an astounding number for an administration that's been in office for only 8 months. Seems like 8 years. I've aged at least 8 years. Republican and Democratic appointed judges. We know there've been plenty of disappointing decisions at the Supreme Court. We're seeing people mobilize in ways that we haven't seen before. So please continue doing what you're doing. You may feel there's no hope. It is incumbent upon each of us to keep creating it. And if we do, we will find the rest of America will come along. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, Congressman Liccardo. And to everyone who's made this forum possible, thank you for those who submitted questions. This forum has been designed to impart information to you, the voter, in accordance with our belief that a democratic government depends on an informed and active participation of its citizens, as well as an open government system that's representative, accountable, and responsive. We also thank Mid-Penn Media for recording this program. It will be posted on the League of Women Voters sites after this. Before we end today's program, I'd like to tell you about 2 additional programs. First, on Tuesday, September 9th from 7 to 9 p.m., we're holding a program on presidential power, on the extent and limits of it, in which Stanford Law Professor Pamela Carlin and Santa Clara University Professor David Sloss will discuss the expansion limits of executive power. It will be held at the Quinlan Center in Cupertino. Then on Tuesday, October 7th, we'll be holding a candidate forum for the assessor's office. That's the county-wide election. That too will be held at the Quinlan Center and from 7 to 8:30 p.m. So anyway, so thank you again for your attention and attendance here. We ask you, as I told you before, we're under some time constraints with this venue, so we'd ask you to continue your conversation outside, and thank you very much for attending.